She walked into the elite university and nobody, just a simple woman in beige, mocked and underestimated. But when a legendary professor tries to humiliate her with a near impossible calculus problem, she doesn't just solve it, she transforms the room. Her chalk becomes her voice, her mind undeniable. And that's only the beginning. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The morning sky above Chicago University hung heavy with gray, as if mirroring the storm that churned quietly inside Sarah Miller. She stood at the edge of the mathematics building, glass walls towering like silent judges, her beige blouse damp from a nervous walk, her fingers tightening on the strap of her worn leather bag. At 34, she didn't look like she belonged here. No student ID, no glowing resume, just a lifelong affair with numbers carried in the pages of a hand-me-down notebook and etched in the creases of her determined brow. Inside, students in sleek jackets and polished boots move with the easy confidence of legacy and privilege. Their chatter, proofs, postulates, internships, washed past her like a foreign language. Sarah moved to the marble hallways like a quiet ripple in a still pool, unseen but trembling with quiet power. Room 307. She paused outside the lecture hall door. The very name etched beside it, Dar, Elizabeth Blackwell, was enough to make most grad students pause. But to Sarah, that name lived on the spine of the dog-eared textbook beside her bed. She had solved its problems by lamplight, not for grades, but because solving them made her feel alive. Her reflection in the glass showed nothing extraordinary. Soft eyes, light brown hair hastily tied. A woman who'd spent more time typing spreadsheets than writing equations. And yet, beneath the modest surface pulsed something unshakable, the fire of mind that had taught itself to fly. She inhaled deeply. "This is math," she whispered. "I belong here." Then she opened the door, and the room, full of curious stares and silent judgment, fell still like the moment before a storm. Sarah barely had time to settle into her seat before the stares returned. Rows of students surrounded her like a jury box, whispers trailing behind manicured nails and designer frames. The boy beside her shifted slightly, as if proximity to ordinariness might be contagious. She kept her eyes on her notebook, each page filled with careful equations and side notes scribbled in the margins. Her pencils were sharpened to clean, deliberate points, her only weapons in this quiet battlefield. Then the door opened. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell entered like a razor slicing through fog. Every line of her crisp black blazer, and every step of her polished heels cut with precision. Her presence silenced the room. Even those who once whispered now sat straighter, wary of her gaze. "Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Calculus," she announced, voice cold and flawless. "For those who belong here, this course would demand the limits of your intellect. For those who don't," her eyes landed on Sarah, lingering. "The drop period ends Friday." Sarah's cheeks flushed, her spine stiffened. Not a word escaped her lips. 20 minutes in, the chalk squeaked across the board as Dr. Blackwell laid out a problem so complex that even the front row students blinked in confusion. Nested integrals, variable chains, a subtle trap in the third step, designed to snare anyone using a textbook method. Then the moment, "S. Miller, Dr. Blackwell said, pausing mid-lecture, her voice slicing through the air like sleet. "You seem unusually confident. Care to solve this?" A hush fell like snowfall. Sarah froze. Her heart thudded against her ribs, screaming flight. But then she saw it. The chalk lie in the metal tray at the bottom of the board. Plain, fragile, breakable, and yet capable of shaping entire mathematical worlds. She stood slowly. The journey from seat to board felt endless. As she approached, a single cough echoed. The boy beside her muttered, "Train wreck." But when her fingers wrapped around the chalk, a strange calm settled over her. It felt like holding memory. All those nights in her studio apartment, solving unsolvable problems under the hum of a second-hand desk lamp. This was no different. Only the silence was louder. She stared at the equation, nested, deceptive, but not unfamiliar. And then she began. First, the formal approach, just enough to establish footing. Her strokes were slow, intentional. Then she pivoted. A substitution, not from textbooks, but something she'd unearthed through sleepless exploration months ago. An elegant shift that unraveled complexity, like silk unwinding from a spool. Behind her, the room stilled. A breath caught in someone's throat. Hayes, standing near the window, moved closer. Even Blackwell, now seated, crossed her arms, but her foot tapped once, twice. Sarah kept going. Each step, each transformation, flowed from her like water, graceful, deliberate, unshaken. The chalk became more than a tool. It became her voice, the one she had hidden for years. The board, her canvas. The numbers, her poetry. Minutes passed. Then, with a final motion, she boxed the answer. Perfect, clean, undeniable. She placed the chalk gently in the tray. It landed with a soft click, a quiet sound that somehow thundered. Then she turned around. Blackwell's expression had shifted. No longer a mass of detached superiority, but something unreadable. Tightened lips, narrowed eyes. Her gaze lingered on the board, searching for error. Hayes stepped forward first. This approach, she said softly, it bypasses 3 textbook methods. It's deficient, elegant. How did you arrive at this substitution? She asked. Sarah clasped her hands to stop them from shaking. I noticed it while working through problems in DR, Blackwell's 3rd textbook. The structure reminded me of a differential model I'd played with last year. A student from the front row raised his hand, eyes wide. Wait, you did all this without a formal degree? Sarah nodded. The room shifted, no longer charged with doubt, but with something new, curiosity, even admiration. Blackwell approached the board. She scanned the solution slowly, the chalk dust catching light on the black surface like stardust. Unconventional, she muttered, but correct. It was the closest thing to praise Sarah suspected she'd ever receive. May I return to my seat? She asked calmly. Blackwell nodded, curt. As Sarah walked back, the same boy who had leaned away earlier subtly moved his tablet, making space. It wasn't much, but it was something. The chalk dust still clung to her fingers. She looked down at it, smiling faintly. Proof, not a problem she'd solved, but the wall she'd just cracked. They had expected her to stumble, to confirm their assumptions. Instead, she had rewritten the narrative. Quietly, elegantly, and that chalk, that fragile stick once meant to shame her, now held the weight of triumph. Blackwell's heels clicked twice against the floor, a sharp signal, like a gavel calling court to order. Before Sarah could fully return to her seat, the professor turned back to the board and began scribbling another equation. This one spanned nearly the entire width of the blackboard. Twisting loops of variables, nested limits, a faint boundary condition lurking beneath the clutter like a trapdoor waiting to snap shut. I believe we still have time for one more problem, she announced, her voice wrapped in velvet but lined with steel. One that demonstrates the limits of intuition. The room tensed. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't a continuation. It was a test. A second round, not of learning, but of proving. Blackwell capped the chalk with a decisive flourish and turned. MS. Miller, since you seem to thrive on complexity, would you care to demonstrate your approach? A pause. Then she extended the chalk like a blade. Sarah hesitated. This time, the whispers weren't mocking. They were nervous, curious. The air had shifted. She could feel the weight of it. Slowly, she took the chalk. This isn't about solving a problem, she thought. This is about solving me. She turned to the board. The problem stared back. Complicated, deliberately misaligned. It looked solvable, almost inviting. But something in its construction was off. It was too busy, too layered, a red herring wrapped in respectable calculus. Sarah drew a deep breath, grounding herself in memory. Her apartment window open at midnight. Coffee gone cold, her fingers blackened by graphite, chasing beauty in the symmetry of proofs. This wasn't about speed. It was about clarity. She started with the obvious path, the method any textbook would prescribe, aligning terms, preparing substitutions. But midway, she paused, Something was wrong. Her chalk hovered. And that's when she saw it, a hidden symmetry, an echo like a reflection in curved glass. It wasn't in the numbers, but in the structure, a faint radial pattern disguised in Cartesian clothes. She stepped back and wiped the board clean. Gasps. "What's she doing?" someone whispered. "She's throwing it away?" Sarah ignored them. She raised the chalk again, this time sketching a circle. A change of coordinates, polar, not Cartesian. Then a transformation, elegant and unlikely. She rotated the entire problem around an imaginary axis, unraveling the nested confusion into something that revealed beauty. Her solution path shortened, not by brute force, but by letting the problem reveal its shape, as though it had only been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Behind her, even Dr. Hayes leaned forward. Sarah's chalk moved swiftly now, each symbol a note in a quiet song only she could hear. She didn't just solve, she translated complexity into grace. And then, without fanfare, she drew a final box around the answer. She turned around. This time, the silence was reverent. Dr. Blackwell approached the board, her posture precise, yet slower than before. She studied the work. Not quickly, but thoroughly. Her eyes scanned each line as if searching for a loose thread, a misstep. But there were none. "It's non-standard," she said finally. "Efficient, Dr." Hayes corrected gently. Blackwell's jaw clenched just slightly. The use of polar substitution in that context is rare. "It's exactly what I would have used," a student in the front row said quietly. Others nodded. A ripple of agreement moved across the room. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. The chalk dust still clung to her hands, white and weightless. And yet it felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. As the class ended, students gathered their belongings, but not before glancing at Sarah with new eyes. One offered a quick, "Nice work." Another lingered, hesitating before saying, "Can I ask how you saw that transformation?" "I didn't," Sarah said softly. "It just unfolded." Outside the lecture hall, Sarah stood quietly as the others filed out. Her hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from the release of tension she'd held like breath in her lungs. Then Dr. Hayes appeared beside her. "You do realize what you just did, don't you?" Sarah gave a small smile. "Survived?" "No, you dismantled a trap." Hayes paused and added, "And you did it with elegance." Sarah looked back at the board, now clean, the symbols wiped away, but the impact still lingering like a trace function over space. "It's strange," she said. "I spent years trying to prove to myself I belonged in a room like this. I thought it would feel louder, the proving." Hayes nodded. "Sometimes the loudest moments are the quietest victories." Behind them, the door creaked open. Dr. Blackwell stood in the doorway, eyes unreadable. "MS. Miller." Sarah turned, expecting criticism, a new trial, but Blackwell only said, "Your work today surprised me." Sarah held her gaze. Was that the point? A pause, then just the slightest incline of the head. It wasn't praise, it wasn't surrender, but it was recognition. And for now, that was more than enough. The bell rang, and the class began to trickle out of the lecture hall. Sarah stayed seated for a moment, her fingers lightly brushing the chalk-stained paper in front of her. The room felt different now. The murmur of conversations that had once been filled with derision or disinterest now carried a weight of respect. She could feel the glances, the sideways stares, the sudden hush when she passed someone. But it wasn't mockery anymore. It was curiosity. It was admiration. A young man who had whispered earlier in the class now walked up to her as she packed her notebook into her bag. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "That transformation with the Jacobian, I didn't even know you could approach it like that. Do you mind if I ask you about it sometime?" Sarah looked up, surprised. The same student who had leaned away from her earlier, as if her ordinariness might infect him, now wanted to know more about her methods. She nodded slowly, the beginnings of a smile tugging at her lips. "Sure, anytime," she said and meant it. She stood up, tucking her bag under her arm. The door to the lecture hall swung open and Dr. Blackwell, now looking slightly less composed than usual, stepped into the room. Her sharp eyes scanned the students who lingered, but her gaze lingered on Sarah. For a moment, there was nothing but a heavy silence, and then Blackwell's lips parted. "MS. Miller," she said, her voice as cold as it had been before. "While I'm not inclined to celebrate unorthodox methods, I will acknowledge that your work today was unexpected. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't derision either." Sarah held her breath, her shoulders stiff, as she met Blackwell's icy stare. "Thank you," she said evenly, though her heart raced in her chest. The acknowledgement was brief, impersonal, and carried the weight of an unspoken challenge. But Sarah had passed it. She had earned her place, even if Blackwell would never say it outright. "Dar." Blackwell turned, her heels tapping against the floor as she left the room, her presence as commanding as it had been when she first entered. Sarah watched her go, the atmosphere in the room now noticeably lighter, as if Blackwell's departure had lifted the very air. As the last of the students filed out, Dr. Hayes lingered, her eyes meeting Sarah's with warmth that Blackwell's coldness had never held. She approached slowly, her movements deliberate, as if she knew what Sarah had just experienced. "That was remarkable, Dr. Hayes said quietly, her voice thoughtful but not effusive. "I'm not sure anyone in that room will ever forget what you did. And I think you've given them something to reconsider about how mathematics works." Sarah looked down, not wanting to meet her gaze. "I wasn't sure I even belonged there, but I guess sometimes the world has to give you space to prove it." Dr. Hayes smiled gently, sitting next to Sarah. "You do belong, more than most people realize. But the question now is, what comes next for you?" Sarah was silent for a moment, her fingers tapping against the desk, a rhythm that mirrored her thoughts. "I don't know. I've never been good at what comes next. I just solve problems, and then I move on to the next one." "You've solved more than just equations today," Dr. Hayes said softly, almost as if to herself. "I think you've solved a part of yourself that you might have kept hidden, and now you have a choice." "A choice?" Sarah echoed, looking up. "Exactly." Dr. Hayes gave her a knowing smile. "The path you're on now is different. You've proven that you can handle these problems. But this is a university, and there's room for more than just solving equations. There's room for you to grow, to shape ideas, to make the kinds of contributions that matter." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know if I'm ready for all that. I wasn't supposed to be here in the first place." "But you are here," Dr. Hayes said, her voice firm yet encouraging. "And that's what matters. No one else is going to decide your future for you. You have the mind, the ability, and now, perhaps, the space to decide what you want to do with all of this." For the first time in years, Sarah felt a shift inside her, like something inside her brain unlocked, or more fittingly, like the door she kept locked for so long was slowly creaking open. The future no longer felt like an overwhelming unknown. It felt like a series of small choices, each waiting for her to make them. She stood up, gathering her things, her bag now feeling lighter than before. I think I need to think about it." "You don't have to rush." Dr. Hayes stood as well, offering a comforting pat on her shoulder. "Just remember, Sarah, you have something very rare. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter." The professor paused for a moment, as if choosing her next words carefully. "There's something real about the way you see the world. You'll find a way to make it your own. And when you do, you'll be unstoppable." Sarah nodded, more to herself than to Dr. Hayes, and made her way toward the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, she felt the weight of the world outside, waiting for her. But now, she didn't feel so out of place anymore. The late afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the mathematics building, casting long golden lines across the polished floor. Sarah Miller stepped into that light, her messenger bag swinging softly against her side, her posture subtly different, lighter, straighter. She had entered this building a few hours ago with doubt tucked deep beneath her ribs. Now, as she pushed through the heavy glass doors, something else pulsed there, belonging. Outside, the campus had quieted. The hum of student life had softened into rustling trees and the fading laughter of distant conversations. Sarah paused at the top of the stone steps, her eyes sweeping over the campus she had once thought forbidden. It was still intimidating, its towers and ivy-clad halls, but no longer unwelcoming. It was no longer someone else's world. She exhaled slowly, the breath catching slightly in her throat as she remembered the sharp stares, the whispered bets on her failure, and DR. Blackwell's cold dismissal. Those things still stung. They might always sting, but they had not stopped her. They had watched her walk to that board like a lamb to slaughter. They expected trembling hands and a cracked voice, a chalk-scrawled mess, an apology. What they got instead was precision, grace, and a mind honed not by formal lectures, but by quiet nights at a kitchen table, by library books, by refusal to quit. She thought of the girl who had once solved integrals by candlelight because the power had been cut off, who had saved weeks of pay to buy secondhand textbooks, who had taught herself math the way others learned languages, by immersion, obsession, and love. Now, a professor had asked for her research. A classmate had invited her to a study group. A woman who once dismissed her had looked her in the eye and acknowledged her mind. She smiled, not a wide, triumphant grin, but something quieter, steadier. A smile born of hard-earned self-recognition. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her co-worker blinked across the screen. "How did it go? Did you survive the math gods?" She typed back, "I didn't just survive. I belonged." The words surprised her even as she sent them. Not, "I impressed them." Not, "I proved myself." She belonged. At the bottom of the steps, she turned once more to look back at the building. Its sharp lines and towering windows now seemed less like walls and more like mirrors, reflecting the truth that had always been there. You don't need a title to be a mathematician. You don't need permission to be brilliant. You just need the courage to show up, chalk in hand. As Sarah walked toward the bus stop, her shadow stretching behind her like a ribbon of persistence, she felt the future not as a distant possibility, but as something waiting for her to claim it. Because sometimes, those the world underestimates are the very ones who reshape it. In a world quick to judge by credentials and appearances, stories like Sarah's remind us that brilliance often hides in the most unassuming places. Her journey is more than an academic triumph. It's a powerful testament to perseverance, quiet courage, and the belief that we all deserve a place at the table. If this heartwarming journey moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Reflect on your own path. These emotional stories, these narrated stories, are just the stories we need. Fragments of Unraveled Fates coming together to inspire change. Let's celebrate every underestimated voice.